Welcome to On Repeat, the weekly podcast giving you an insight into the minds of musicians, with me, Ellie Rashid.
And me, Hattie Winter. In this episode, we're talking to Emma Hall, aka Blulu. She is a London-based producer creating electronic music from analogue synthesizers and found sound. Foregrounding atmosphere and tone over traditional structure, she follows the IDM blueprint set by the likes of Boards of Canada, crafting otherworldly soundscapes from lush pads, intricate arps, and lo-fi beats.
She's an enthusiastic advocate of diversity in music, volunteering with the incredible charity Girls Rock London, and running synth and music production workshops for the likes of ROLI and First Timers Fest.
And of course, before we kick off with the interview, Emma has let us share a little snippet from her forthcoming EP. The track is called Before It Begins, and it features the words of the spoken word artist Shakira Art and Sound. So yeah, keep it on repeat with Emma Hall, aka Blulu.
Moment before it all begins. Purple cuts through the bend. Lightning does not strike twice here. It stands still to illuminate. Path lit through crag and crater. The magnetic breeze discords. We edged along the crumbling wall, through shattered haze, echoed in the dust.
So music isn't my main job, so I work for a charity during the week, but I deliberately work 4 days a week, so more or less part-time, which gives me nearly half of the week to be focusing on music projects. So I'm kind of balancing the two at the moment. And I mostly create music for myself. So I do, electronic music using synthesizers and then building up beats from bits of found sound. And I'm definitely still on a learning journey with that. So I decided to start producing my own music about 2 or 3 years ago. So there's still, I think I'll be learning it my whole life. I don't think there's a point where you finish that journey. And then alongside that, there are a few kind of, collaborations going on, with various friends who are also musicians. And I really like having that balance of focusing on my projects and them just being this very kind of focused activity to do, but then also keeping collaborations as a different way of making music. And yeah, you learn so much from just observing another person's creative process. And yeah, another person will always come up with an idea that you could never have come up with in a million years, and vice versa. So it's nice to still have that type of music making working as well.
So did your kind of music journey start in Liverpool?
That's probably a bit of a grand claim, I would say. Well, I guess I haven't actually lived in Wirral or on the Wirral since I was 18. And so like at school, I learnt a bit of piano. I played in a samba band, the most English non-Brazilian samba band you've ever seen. So I guess there were sort of hints of things. Played in a little rubbishy band. But yeah, I kind of then left music and didn't do much of it at all whilst I was at uni, and lived abroad for a while, and again wasn't doing much. And then it was more when I came back to London where I was like, hang on, there was this thing I used to like doing.
Did anything like kickstart that?
It was a weird story where, so when I moved back to London, it was the first time, in my life that I'd been like, okay, I'm going to stay here for a while. So I'd saved up, and ended up going to Denmark Street to Wunjo Keys to buy just an electronic piano, and I was like, I'm just going to play for myself. And then got chatting to the shopkeeper in there, and he was like, oh, we're looking for a synth player in the band. And I was like, what is a synth? Same as a piano. And and so I had like massive performance anxiety and didn't didn't know if it was actually going to be for me, because I remembered like playing music at school and just being too scared and it being very traumatic. But yeah, started off with the most simple synth lines you can possibly imagine, basically just moving the cutoff filter around. And that kind of helped me build up the ability to play and actually enjoy playing. So yeah, it was just by freak incident of getting chatting to a shopkeeper.
I feel
It's
like
mad.
that's the dream, to walk into a music shop on such a famous street in London. Like that is something, that's film material right there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it was very fun. It was very fun. It was this kind of 80s synth pop type band called Private Life. So we had a lot of fun playing gigs. We always had a party vibe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's I was reading about that. So tell us more about Private Life.
Private Life, it was originally a 5-piece, like quite a traditional indie setup, and the bass player was a girl called Alex, who is a volunteer with Girls Rock London. So there's the Girls Rock London connection.
Right, okay.
But yeah, Alex and the guitarist, Rupert, moved on, and that just meant it was me plus the lead singer and guitarist Gus and the drummer Jack. So we turned it into more of like an electronic 3-piece. And we sort of ran with that for a few years. And then it sort of came to a natural conclusion, and that was at the point where I was already starting to work on my own stuff individually. But yeah, it was very fun, and it was great as a way of just kind of building up live experience. So we played all of like the standard indie London venues, like your Shackwell Arms, like what's the one in Camden? I can't remember. There are loads in Camden. We played all the Camden ones.
Yeah.
But, you know, just like the sort of crappy Wednesday night gigs where 3 of your mates turn up and that kind of thing.
But they're important, those ones.
But they're so good.
They're really important.
And they're always like, yeah, fun social occasions.
Yeah. I think those kind of things, they really are like stepping stones for the stuff that you want to do on your own, or when you're trying to sort of navigate your own creative process. Did you feel like there were many aspects musically that you took from Private Life into for the music that you do now? I mean, sorry.
Yeah, I think that what was really nice about Private Life was that we had a lot of synths going on. There was one point where a girl called Jan also joined us, and so we had like 4 analog synths plus a drum machine on stage, and we were creating this very electronic sound, but it was all live, whereas it would have been easier, and sometimes we did cop out and use a backing track, but at times we were creating this fully analog live sound. And so that's definitely stuck with me. Like I started playing a synth called a Minilog with Private Life, and that's still the main one that I use for my own stuff. But then it was also blended with live drums, and I quite like that blend of kind of very predictable drum loops and kind of arpeggiators on synths, but then mixing it up with a quite live, less predictable sound. So yeah, I think that definitely came with me, but now I'm kind of moving away from that kind of pop song structure and not doing lyrics or anything like that so much.
What was the thing that grabbed you about producing? Was it like you wanted to empower yourself and like make your own beats, or what was like the first lesson you learned? Because I think producing is such a great skill. It's kind of not really a question, but more just.
So if you play an acoustic instrument or just a single instrument, then you always rely on a whole team of other people to actually turn that into a song that is ready to distribute. And so I guess I was drawn to producing because you can more or less own that end-to-end process. I think it's still useful to have someone else mix it, just in a kind of editor-writer relationship. But yeah, I think I liked having complete ownership of the process and being able to go back and rework things, as opposed to going to a recording studio with your synthesizer, playing something once and just hoping that was the right take. I'm terrible at that. So that was one element. And then I guess just my music taste is electronic music, in amongst other things, but I think that's definitely one of the main types of music that I like to listen to. So I was basically just imitating people who I thought made good music already. I think that's probably why.
Yeah, I mean, imitation is the highest form of flattery, or whatever the phrase is. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you get now like loads of young, I want to say kids, but they're not kids. Loads of young people being like, I'm going to learn producing just so I can produce, like, make that song. It's the easiest way to start it.
Yeah. And I think you asked as well, like, how I started figuring it out. Because I think this is something that it's the hardest step, especially for groups of people who aren't, like, basically kind of white cis men who are just like, yeah, I can do that because I can see all these other men who are doing it, and I'm just going to get stuck in. And I think that a lot of women, especially as I've noticed through Girls Rock London, is a bit like, oh, that seems technical and I don't know where to start, and people get really freaked out, whereas actually it's much easier to produce than to learn an instrument well, I would say.
It's interesting.
It's a bit of a shortcut if you want to be creating music very quickly. But the way that I started it was a friend of mine, Danny, works at Point Blank Music School. But basically he's really friendly. He's really great at explaining, kind of getting under the hood of something. So when I was first starting, I just every now and then would kind of pay him for 2 hours of his professional time and take him a track and just be like, how did the producer do this? And then we'd sit and look at Logic together and work backwards and kind of start with a destination and then work our way towards it. And through that, he kind of taught me about how various different plugins work, how to create different beats, how to do sampling. And I found that much better than going on like a 10-week how to produce music course. Yeah. Like, it was quicker and it felt as if you were kind of getting to the stage you wanted to be at in a much more efficient way.
When you were talking about male cis men and it being kind of like, I guess I completely agree. I think they are more sort of attracted to those kind of roles as producers or anything that seems more technical, and it's assumed to be more sort of intimidating for women, particularly. And I wondered about the flip side of this as well, because, so for example, I mean, I do a bit of producing, probably not as much as you. I also play cricket, and I've had how the hell did this come into your head? But I do have some cis male friends who are like very surprised and almost kind of like I just wondered, like, have you faced any of that in your kind of field? Like, have you ever had people a bit surprised and a bit like, oh, you're doing that, that's different, and does that make you feel like it's a kind of weird novelty in a way?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think I'm in a strange position, especially in London, in the music networks that I move around and the communities that I'm part of are just like overwhelmingly biased towards women and non-binary people. So when I kind of look around my peers and the musicians that I'm talking to, I'm just like doing the same as everyone else.
That's sick.
And also like when I think about different gigs that I've played, they've also been often kind of rooted within those communities. So when I've been out and about with my producer hat on, then I haven't actually encountered much of what you just described. But definitely when I played in private life and I was the only girl in that 3-piece, I did find that, like, you'd rock up at a venue, I'd be the only woman doing anything on the stage that evening, and there'd be loads of like guys with guitars. And they would they'd turn up and they'd like do a kind of manly handshake or like those weird kind of high five thing with Gus and Jack, and then they'd assume I'm like the girlfriend or something, so they just wouldn't acknowledge me. And so there was just this kind of default assumption that, oh, if there's a girl here during the sound check, she's just watching, she's not part of it.
Holy shit.
And so I definitely noticed that quite a lot. But yeah, as things are at the moment, I don't notice it so much. I do notice it with, so I follow various different tutorial channels on places like Instagram. And often they're run by guys, and they will be often a bit of a boys club, and they'll occasionally post up memes that are just pretty sexist and and so I'm always piping up in the comments like, excuse me, women produce too. But yeah, it's not something that I come across too much in everyday life.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm sure it happens though. It definitely happens.
It's so heartwarming to hear that you've actually selected and made the conscious decisions to be involved in those kind of groups where you kind of don't have to worry about that thing. I think it really improves your life, and that's something that I'm sure you'll agree about Girls Rock London. It just facilitates that kind of space where it's the best week of your life, because you're just there and you're like, this is how I want the world to feel all the time, because you just feel like everyone's on the same level. There's no hierarchy, and everyone is empowered. It really is like that. It sounds utopian, but it really is like that for the whole week. So you met was it Alex, you said, from Private Life, and did they introduce you to Girls Rock?
So I remember it was like 2 or 3 years ago, and we were in Hyde Park on a sunny day back when the world was normal. And she was kind of getting set to be doing this camp, and she was like, oh, you should do it, you should be a synth tutor. And at that point I thought, I've got nowhere near the right credentials to be a proper tutor at a music camp, because when you actually hear that, you think you're going to have to be grade 8 on something, or and I think it was difficult for me to understand the vibe of the camp just by her describing it to me. But I took a real, I just kind of thought, right, I'm going to put myself out there. What's the worst that can happen? And then was really glad that, the community invites everyone to get involved. It's
Absolutely.
Not that you're picked out of a long list of people. Like, if you want to be involved, you can be. I volunteered at my first camp 2 years ago. Yeah, like the Maybank holiday 2 years ago. It's the adults camp. Kind of coming into that group was just like life changing. It really was.
I completely believe you. I mean, I did it last year, and I really do think it's changed my life. It's really been nice to kind of retain this sense of community and keep having discussions. And Hattie, you should try it. It is life changing. Like, it actually is.
I will. Hopefully there's not like an upper age limit. But I was going to say, for those that don't know what Girls Rock London is, probably describe what it is, because I do know like a little bit about it, but I'm sure loads of people are like, never heard of this.
That is a good point. Do you want to give it a go, Emma?
I'll give it a go. I really don't want to let the leaders down, because they do such a great elevator pitch for the charity.
They do.
And I've not been trained recently. But I mean, I guess the charity it doesn't start from a point of music. It starts from a point of self-esteem and confidence building. So the charity's mission is to build the self-esteem amongst, girls and trans girls and non-binary youth, and also through into adults. And there's a real recognition that being creative musically is a thing which can very effectively build that confidence. So that's where the idea for these very intensive, they are intense emotionally, but they're not intense in terms of you must play perfectly by the end of the week, but they're kind of very condensed music camps where over the course of a long weekend or a week, you learn an instrument, form a band, write a song, play a gig in the space of that week. So it really tears down that idea that you must be, grade 8 or super skilled or, a genius at this instrument before anyone will accept listening to what you have to play or what you have to say. I think what's another really admirable trait of the Girls Rock London charity and the movement is that it's a movement that kind of accepts it needs to keep on growing and keep on learning. So Ellie, you'll have seen in the WhatsApp group, there's a big conversation about female drill music going on and how can we kind of take this very new trend that's happening amongst young people in London and bring it into our camp so that we're not just saying, oh, here is a guitar, play something that sounds like Oasis. So it keeps growing and I guess that is helpful for me to just have my ear into that, even if I don't directly reflect it in the type of music that I make. But it has led to kind of some really fun experiments. So, Shakira, who's one of the, other volunteers, she's a drum tutor at camp. She does a lot of spoken word. And then after we both played a showcase last year, we both really liked what each other was doing. And so we then collaborated and suddenly you've got an electronic, quite ambient track, but you've got Shakira's poetry over the top of it. And I would definitely not have thought to have done that had it not been for that melting pot of the different genres and types of people that come into Girls Rock.
So like Instagrammers and YouTubers that you use for, well, maybe not, I don't know, do you use YouTubers or just Instagrammers or?
A bit of both, yeah.
A bit of both. I just wondered like who they were or anything you particularly enjoyed.
Ooh. So there's one Instagrammer called Aubrey Whitfield. I don't know if you know about her.
She's really cool. She's very inspirational.
Yeah, she's from the Wirral, so she's from the same place as me. And I remember coming across her when she just had like a couple of thousand followers and messaging her and being like, I'm from the Wirral too. Be my friend. But her online presence has really exploded. And I think it's because she posts really useful content. It's always informative, but she also shows her own journey and her own vulnerabilities, in terms of how long it's taken to build herself up as a producer. And I think what's interesting is that in terms of the type of music she produces, I'm not that bothered about it. It's, you know, we're working in different spaces in terms of what our taste is, but just in terms of her technical dedication to production and her ability of sharing it in a way that's easy to understand, I find really helpful.
Yeah, I really like her. I love her Instagram. I stalk her quite a lot for my work. And then like over 10 years, she's made this amazing studio for herself, but she's very honest. It didn't start off like that and no one does. And you know, no one really should, arguably. I think it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a crazy thing to have so much expensive equipment that you haven't yet learned how to use.
Yeah. And I think there's a trap you can fall into of thinking, oh, my music will be better if I get the next expensive thing and get this synth and get this plugin. I think if you learn your kind of skill set with a very small set of tools, then that means that at the core of what you're doing, there's more to it. And yeah, you just become a better producer that way, I think. I say that because I don't have loads of stuff. So I'm like, I'm doing fine without all of these fancy speakers.
What is your like studio setup?
Yeah, so I've basically just got a bit of a setup in my room back in London. So I've got my MacBook, which has got Logic and Ableton on it, and so I use Logic for production of songs, and I use Ableton for live performance. Broadly, that's the split, or I kind of jump between the two. And then I've got 2 analog synths. So I have the Mini Log, and then I have an old vintage Juno 106 that I really treated myself to a couple of years ago.
Nice.
And they work really nicely together because one properly sounds like your sort of Stranger Things 80s vibe, and then one is has a bit more of a cutting edge modern sound. So I have those 2 things. And I've got a bunch of little toys that I've acquired. So I've got one of the little pocket operator drum synths, and one of the ROLI Seaboard mini block things. So I did a workshop for women in tech with them a year or so ago, and so that was kind of my payment, if you like, for the workshop. But I've had loads of fun with it, and it's great for live performance as well, because it's so responsive to the different ways in which you touch it. It's not like a normal keyboard.
These tech workshops that you're talking about sound really cool. Where did you do that? And are you going to be doing any more, do you think, in the future? I'm down.
Yeah, I would love to do one in the future. I guess lockdown's put everything on hold for the time being, but I should probably think about how I can share the things that I know virtually as well. I guess, I mean, most of it does come through the Girls Rock London community. So every now and then there will be someone who pops up on the WhatsApp saying, we're looking for people to lead the workshops, or they know someone who knows someone. And so all of the opportunities come through the Girls Rock London volunteer network. I mean, including chatting to you folks today, right? So, it makes the lives simpler for the people who are part of that network, because you can just build up your skills very easily and share what you know very easily. There was a bit of a flurry of different workshops over the course of last year. So there was the ROLI Women in Tech one, which was just a whole day of different women in music sharing what they knew, and they'd kitted it out really well. So, everyone was set up with laptops that had all the software on to actually like follow along in real time. They had loads of synths to try out. Yeah, it was incredible.
Oh wow, that's very well carried out. I've put on similar workshops like that for my work, and that gets expensive very quickly.
Yeah,
so very
but I think at the same time, like I've done first timers workshops at DIY Space where you're really cobbling together things for free, and you end up with kind of a similar result from both ways of doing things, because if you've got people who care about it at the center, then you'll find a way to make it work. But yeah, those things are so much fun, especially when they have the kind of female slant, because you just sort of see people's eyes lighten up who've never realized how easy it is. And so to be able to just kind of give people that spark and then just see what comes out of it in the long term is awesome.
Definitely. This kind of like steers away actually from a few things we've been talking about, but I wanted to get back to your music for a second. And actually, the name that you use, Blue Loop. So it's Blue Loops Sound or Blue Loops?
It's Blue Loop. Yeah,
Blue
just
Loop.
one Blue Loop.
Blue Loop, which I really love actually, and coming up with a name, whether it's for yourself or with a band or whatever, is a pain.
Oh yeah,
in the bottom.
Yes.
And how did you find that, and how did you come up with the name?
By looking through the science pages on Wikipedia.
Really?
So basically, like when I first started this project, it was sort of all captured on a blog, and the blog was called shemakessounds.com. And so that was before I'd actually kind of finished any tracks of my own, and I just decided I'm going to document this journey of learning to produce. So I did that, and I played a few gigs using that same name of She Makes Sounds. But then I think once the music was starting to become its own thing, and there was this kind of clear personal project, I kind of wanted to move away from a name that was obviously gendered and just kind of have it as something that is just its own thing. So I started just clicking around like all of the pages to do with like space on Wikipedia, like outer space.
Yeah.
Because I guess if you think about a name like Floating Points and that kind of thing, it's taking something that is out there in science or maths and just stealing it. And so I found this page about a phenomenon called a blue loop, which is basically, I'm going to explain this so badly because I don't have a PhD in physics.
Don't worry, I won't know.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's kind of like at a point where if a star is cooling down, sometimes it will have this sudden flare up of life, and before it then properly dies. And it creates this thing on the graphs that monitor it that gets called a blue loop. And it's quite a beautiful curve. Like if you Google blue loop and look at the actual image, it's a really beautiful...
I'm Googling.
Yeah, have a look. And then I like it because obviously my music is based around loops. And then also this idea of a kind of sudden flare up of life event and activity out of nothing seems like a really nice idea to me.
In your music, you've got lots of found sounds, and I'd love to talk about where you find the found sounds.
Ooh, anywhere and everywhere. So I just record them on my phone, and if I ever hear an interesting noise or sound, then I will just stop. And especially if I'm walking with someone, I'm like, you just go on ahead, and I'm going to stand here with my phone for a minute.
Oh wow!
And then I try to name it as rationally as I can, but often I'll just kind of look back and have no clue what it was. But yeah, I'll just kind of look up ones that I've done recently. There's been a lot of like park stuff recently. Oh yeah, there was I was cooking some sausages a few weeks ago, and like the sound of like the sizzling and the spitting was absolutely mad. So I just like recorded 2 minutes worth of that, and I want to use that to make some like spitty percussion or something. I don't know.
How would you... This is really interesting because I was actually thinking about doing this for a project, and I was thinking, do you take that recording from your phone and then upload it onto what program do you use?
Yeah, so I'd normally upload it into Logic. Yeah. And then within Logic, I mean, you can do so much different stuff to it. So you can use flex time to make it longer or shorter and change the speed. You can just do whatever, you can reverse it. You can just make it pretty much unrecognizable from what it was originally. And often I'll just muck around and I won't really be doing it with much of a specific like intention in mind. I'll just kind of play around with it until it sounds very unique or is going to fit within the texture of the track that I'm building, and then just go from there. But you might have like a 2-minute recording but decide to use like a quarter of a second of it and then turn that into your percussion section.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, or you might decide, okay, I just want this to be this atmospheric thing that goes on the 2-minute loop all the way through, and it's just this incidental thing in the background. No, I don't really have a set way of doing it. Just kind of muck around and click until I want to stick with it.
I know a guy who he was using loads of found sounds. His track was going to be like his journey to the airport and like the flight, and then his time in the city he was in, and then like the transport back.
It's so nice to have like a focus for a project like that, to kind of constrain yourself in that way, because the hardest thing with found sound and with electronic music in general is like, where the hell do you start and where do you finish? And so to kind of say, okay, on this trip I'm gonna make a track that kind of fits within like that experience. Yeah, that sounds like a great thing to do.
So do you not start with like a thing like that, like a parameter of your music? Is it kind of like you're just going to take it wherever it goes?
I guess I try lots of different ways of starting and finishing a song. My friend, actually, you might know Hannah Stacey. She's also a Girls at London volunteer. So she actually created this inspo generator, she called it, where it's basically this page online and you refresh it and it gives you a tempo, a key signature, like what instrument you're going to create first, what part you're going to create first, and then a mood. And it'll just give you a random combination, and then you have to, those are your kind of limits. And sometimes you'll create something and it will be really interesting and you want to develop it, and sometimes it will be genuinely terrible. But, I think that I often just try and start with little sketches. And then there'll be ones where I kind of revisit it a couple of weeks later and think, actually, yeah, there was something in that, and then start developing it. So yeah, that's normally the structure that I would go for. And quite often, if I find like a beat or a chord progression that sounds interesting and I'm happy with, there's kind of a technique that I found quite helpful, where I'll just try and like twist one element of it to kind of shake it out of its comfort zone. So there's a track that's up on my SoundCloud that's called Under, and originally it was kind of an 8-bar cycle, and it's very chilled out. And then all I did was kind of turn it into a 10-bar cycle. So I just made that cycle last a little bit longer than you're expecting, and just cycle this 10-bar thing. And so immediately it stops being kind of in that sort of poppy structure, but it still is easy to listen to. So it just kind of gets your ears' attention, and you're not quite sure why, unless you're literally counting the bars as they happen. And so that's quite a fun way that I've found to just be creating music that I like, but also feel as if it's got its own individuality about it. It's just trying to twist one thing to make it beyond what I just would have made in my kind of closed box mindset.
And once you've like cut the sample, how do you, I'm trying to work out how you get from like this one bit, whether it's like I don't know, I'm trying to work out how you get to like a track. You know what I mean? Like, cause I think maybe I just don't think that way. So I find it such an abstract concept, because I just don't understand how you go from like a sizzle of a sausage to then like listening to your SoundCloud, like how you go to then like fully formed pieces of music.
I love it, by the way. Like I love that kind of idea of like finding new sounds and creating that way. I just wanted to chip in to say that. Like I'm just like, it's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to like unpick your own process, because when you look back, because you end up spending so many hours on things, each time you go back to your computer, you might be like, okay, I'm gonna put a chord progression over this, or I'm gonna like work on this section and work on like building the rhythm up to a drop or something like that. Not that my music has many drops. It has things that in my head are drops, and then I play it to my friends and they're like, sounds really chilled out to me. And I'm like, did you not hear the drop? But it always ends up being quite chilled. But yeah, each time you come back, you'll work on a new section, or you'll add a new layer in. And then suddenly, I guess you find, what I normally find is that I've created this enormous Frankenstein's monster that's got way too much going on in it, and so many different ideas all layered up and squashed into 2 or 3 minutes. And then once you've kind of got all of that ideas and creativity just layered up, it's a case of just like stretching it back out and being quite brutal with the stuff that even if you enjoyed making at the time doesn't have a place in the track anymore. So yeah, that's kind of how I'd end up doing it, is that, yeah, you end up with way too much stuff and then you cut back maybe. But it changes for each track. And I'm quite interested to try out, so I don't know if you've listened to much Rival Consoles. He's an electronic producer. He does this interesting thing. If you go on his Instagram, he works on his structure of his songs as these kind of shapes, and it almost looks like some kind of modern art, where it's kind of a line and the line kind of grows or shrinks. And that shows him, he kind of maps out for electronic music the structure using these geometric shapes. I'm describing this terribly. You'll have to head to his Instagram. But I quite like that idea of like with electronic music, because it's not like verse, chorus, middle eight and all that kind of thing, to actually see it in terms of, okay, we're going to start quiet and then build it up to something that's busy and then draw it back down again, or we're going to start big, and to just think about it in terms of the movement within the song is probably the best way to draw that out. But yeah, I'm bad at planning it at the start. I normally I'll get 3 minutes in and I'll listen to it from the start to that 3 minute point and then think, as a listener, where do I want that to go next? Am I like dying for a drop, or do I want everything to be stripped out? And so I'll just kind of switch to listener mode and then just basically go for like the gratification of what I want to hear as a listener.
No, I was just going to say, it's really hard to switch to listener mode, I think. And we have the same thing, don't we, Hattie, of like when you've been creating something or when you've listened to it, to actually get that sort of fresh set of ears on it and be in a different space to review your work. It's really hard. How do you kind of think, right, I'm in listener mode now, I'm going to be objective about my work now.
Probably just leaving some space between when you're working on things and when you listen back is probably good. And then it's also helpful to put it on a different like set of speakers, or if you've been working on it with your headphones, listen to it in the real world or vice versa, or just kind of listen to it whilst you're traveling somewhere on the train, or just kind of put yourself in the places where you normally listen to other people's music and just be like, oh, my track came up on shuffle, and just see if your ears lap it up or if you're just like, what the hell is this?
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, like, so just, and I guess I do the same thing with like a friend who is an author. So if he's sending me a draft of his book to read, it'll be in PDF, but I put it on my Kindle so that it feels like I'm reading a real book. It is a real book. But yeah, I think you can just sort of trick yourself into being a consumer of art by slotting it into those settings. And there'll be days where you listen back to it and you'll just hate it. And then there'll be days where you listen back to it and you're like, oh, 3 months ago when I was making that, I was a genius. I could never do that now. And you just kind of go between the two, and you don't know which. It just depends on the day. It really depends on the day.
Exactly. So you're making electronic music, but do all of your influences lie in that genre?
No, they don't. And I think I'm inspired by a lot of genres where I just can't even fathom the musical talent that goes into them. So I guess I listen to like bits of like jazz type music. And I listen to like more kind of bands and more of your kind of alternative, like, indie bands, not indie bands. What am I talking about? This is a question I was most terrified of being asked because I'm terrible at describing influences.
Honestly,
one thing that I found really helpful that I sort of fell into a few months ago is so I do think it's very easy to fall into a rut of like listening to electronic music or like the bands that you like or jazz or like whatever your set genres are, and to feel like very like blinkered by that. Some friends have been working on this blog project called the Music Map, where they were aiming to so their ultimate goal was to be blogging about kind of up and coming or like underground or interesting music in every country in the world.
Oh, wow.
And that you go onto their website and you've got a world map and you can click to see, you know, what's being played in Georgia or what's being played in Ecuador. And they reached their goal a few weeks ago and they made a playlist that has a song from every country in the world.
Amazing.
But it's all like kind of music that is interesting now and it's been made by people who are like in that country's music scene now. So it's not like, oh, Germany, we have Kraftwerk. Like it's stuff that's kind of more on the pulse. And I found that was a really helpful playlist to listen to, just to kind of open my ears and start thinking beyond just like Boards of Canada and, you know, the kind of standard stuff that I'd normally listen to and kind of aspire to sound like. There was one band in particular. So the Czech Republic entry on this playlist was this band called like, what are they called? I definitely can't pronounce it right, but it's like Korjen, like Korjen. And it's basically, they're formed in the Czech Republic, but it's 3 women from different Eastern European countries, and they sing in quite a traditional way. But then the music that is alongside that is a little bit rocky, it's a little bit jazzy, but it's got this like very in your face, like Eastern European, often quite grating vocals. But it's so fascinating to hear like quite a traditional, unusual way of singing, but fused with more modern music making techniques. And it just kind of like just lifted me out of this rut that I was in terms of just listening to lots of electronic to something that felt really refreshing to listen to, and just challenged you in terms of thinking, do I want to be using more vocals in my music, or these chord progressions, like how can I go and magpie them? And so sometimes I'll just kind of come across those little discoveries and just go down a rabbit hole with them.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way of being. Do you think you're
ever write lyrics?
So the thing also volunteering at Girls Rock London camps is that the participants on the camps, the young people especially, are so good at writing lyrics. They're like
they are so good.
They're like very uninhibited, but they have like a real sense of poetry and rawness. And every time I hear these young people writing lyrics, I'm like, I'm not a lyricist because it just doesn't come naturally. And I did like a couple of songs that I wrote lyrics for with Private Life, but I always just felt like uncomfortable with that. But I am trying to do like experiment a bit more with vocals and vocal harmonies. Again, just trying to imitate these Eastern European really close, quite grating harmonies. So I'm trying to play around with that. But at the moment, I'm either just doing like oohs and ahs on my tracks, or I'm like doing covers. So I didn't write the lyrics myself. But I think it's such a skill, and whenever I write anything, it's not good. It's not good, my friends.
It's really difficult though to review lyrics.
Yeah.
I find the same thing. It's difficult to have real faith in your lyrics, I think, a lot of the time. But I also think in Girls Rock, I think you're totally right about people just writing amazing lyrics. And I think that part of that is the validation and the support, which encourages them to just go with it. And that is a huge thing. And I think that's just a huge thing about being a musician and putting your music out there in general, just validation of your ideas to allow you the freedom to carry on. And I think lyric writing is the same, right?
It is. And I've got massive respect for people who are good at lyrics and who kind of, I think being good at lyrics is probably equivalent to being able to be very vulnerable and share very personal experiences. And so I think there's probably stuff that if you're going to become a good lyricist, you have to be okay with sharing that side of yourself. And with kind of producing music that's instrumental, you can separate that presentation of yourself with like your presentation of your music. So yeah, I think it would be quite a big undertaking to be like, okay, this is a different side of things that I'm going to explore now. I haven't quite got myself there yet. Maybe one day.
Thanks so much to Emma, aka Blue Loop, for the interview. We'll definitely be keeping her on repeat.
Blue Loop will be releasing her debut EP, Grand Illusion, later this year. It's an immersive journey of ambient soundscapes and sampled beats, and features a collaboration with musician and spoken word artist Shakira Art and Sound, all made on her Juno 106 and Minilog.
You can listen to her music on blueloopsounds.com or find her on SoundCloud at Blue Loop Sounds, or head over to her Instagram, Blue Loop Sounds. Again, we'll put all the information in the show notes.
We hope you've enjoyed the episode and want to keep us on repeat. You can follow, subscribe and like us on your podcast platform of choice, and slide into our DMs on Instagram by following us at On Repeat the Podcast. All information will be included in the show notes.
On Repeat was made, produced and edited by us, and the theme music is an original piece by Ellie's jazz band Fujiyama and wonderfully resampled by Dee, the producer for the podcast. All of our guests give us permission to use their music. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to keep it on repeat.